No, the ayes have it. This bill is set down for third reading next sitting day. Call on Government Orders of the Day numbers 4 and 5.
Regulatory Reform Bill, second reading. Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill, second reading.
Honourable John Banks.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Regulatory Reform Bill and the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill be now read a second time.
Did well there. Well done.
So, any further speakers?
Speaker, Mr Speaker.
Question is the motion.
Oh, look.
I move
the
Reform Bill and the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill be now read a second time. Both bills form a key part of this government's commitment to better and less regulation. Better and less regulation for business, the lifeblood of the New Zealand economy, for those that create the wealth, from the farms to the manufacturers to the retailers, for people that go out and commit their money, take the risks, produce the jobs and pay the taxes. As an aside, I would note, as an ACT MP for Epsom, these bills dovetail nicely with the concepts, philosophies and principles of the ACT Party. These are the concepts of less regulation, smaller government and free enterprise. Before we can spend, we first have to sell, and ACT believes a more prosperous New Zealand will be one that unleashes business from unnecessary and unwanted regulation by the government. As Minister, I'd like to acknowledge the work of the previous Minister of Regulatory Reform in getting these bills to this stage. His commitment to improving our regulatory environment is seen in these bills. I would also like to thank the Commerce Select Committee and all those who made oral and written submissions on the Regulatory Reform Bill. The committee's report includes some sensible recommendations to further reduce compliance costs for business. And my role in life here in this ministry and coalition is to further reduce compliance costs for business. This government is a party for small business. The 340,000 business people up and down the country that employ less than 10 people. This government is committed to addressing the barriers, big or small, that hold back New Zealand businesses from reaching their fullest potential. The challenging economic environment makes reducing compliance costs more than ever. I know that the people of Epsom will be very happy to see what their local MP is doing in his role as Minister for Regulatory Reform to get the government off their backs and out of their pockets. And if this crowd opposite was in charge, they wouldn't be getting off their backs and out of their pockets. They'd be heavier on their backs and deeper into their pockets as they borrow more and spend more money that they don't produce. The Regulatory Reform Bill improves the quality of regulation in New Zealand. It recommends small but important amendments to the 13 acts to reduce the regulatory burden on business. It reduces those 13 acts that produce regulatory impediments on the spirit of free enterprise and the people that create the wealth across this country. The bill was introduced under Standing Order 259A, as the amendments can be regarded as implementing a single broad policy, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill repeals, listen to this, 31 unnecessary and spent acts of Parliament on the statute books tonight. This bill was introduced under Standing Order 259B as the amendments are of similar nature to each other. And I endorse the Commerce Committee's commitment to canvass a number of options to ensure the progress of these bills is as efficient as possible. And I particularly want to acknowledge the efforts of the committee chair, the Honourable Leanne Dalziel, to saving this House time. It is not easy, but I do acknowledge her work and give her thanks and praise for helping out small business up and down this country that says the government's too heavy on our backs, and too deep in our pockets. It is pleasing that the Business Committee, which I'm a member of, has agreed to my request that they be treated as cognate bills under Standing Orders 266. The Commerce Committee also recommended that the Committee of the Whole of House staged be dispensed with for the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill. And it is pleasing, Mr Speaker, that the Business Committee also agreed with this request and the bills can now be progressed very efficiently. Very efficiently. Well, we're from the government, Mr Speaker. We're here to help small business. And the people listening to this debate on their crystal sets up and down the country tonight will be pleased that a businessman is the Minister of Small Business. Turning now to the Regulatory Reform Bill. Most submitters were supportive of the Regulatory Reform Bill, and the Commerce Committee has not recommended any substantive changes. How good is that? I would like to focus on the most significant issues addressed by the committee. The committee recommended changes to the amendments to the Agricultural Compounds and Veterinary Medicines Act 1997. And my colleague from Epsom, he knows that bill as he knows the Animal Products Act 1999 and the Wine Act 2003. And he wants less regulation in business, less red tape, less difficulties and less government interference. That's what my colleague from Epsom, my mate from Epsom, also recommends as well. The committee has recommended changes to the amendments to the Companies Act 1993, clarifying that companies may send listen to this, as if we'd have to do this, Mr Speaker, that companies can send hard copy materials as well as electronic material for communications, meetings and voting. And the government was involved in that. As if it is the government's business as to where and how companies can send electronic material for communications. The committee also recommends changes to clarify that a shareholder may appoint more than one proxy for a meeting as long as there is only one proxy exercised in any particular share. The committee recommended changes to Clause 50 of the bill, which enables regulation to impose timeframes on concessions processing under Part 3B of the Conservation Act 1987. This change will allow for the rolling on of expired concessions where an application has been made for a new concession. It's amazing that we even have to do that. And why would have that been put in the statute in the first place, Mr Speaker? So it needs to be changed by the Minister of Small Business in circa 2012. But I'm glad I'm doing it, and I'm glad the House and this side of the House supports it, as indeed does the other side of the House, which is very encouraging for small business up and down the country, that the Labor Party would be supporting small business enterprise up and down the country. The government, it's novel, but it's welcome. Small business up and down the country that I represent, from the powerhouse seat of the New Zealand electoral system, Epsom electorate, they say we want less regulation and we want the government to get off their backs, and that's what this is about. Submitters were mainly supportive of the changes to the Films, Videos and Publications Classifications Act 1993. One submitter sought a change to the commencement date, Part 5, to ensure that industry can gain benefits from the amendments as soon as possible. And the committee said that's not a bad idea. Leanne Dalziel said we can tick that off, and she has, and full marks for that. The government is committed to ensuring that industry can take advantage of reduced compliance costs as swiftly as possible. And as we come out of the second wave of the global recession, businesses need the government to get off their backs and out of their pockets, and this bill does that. Part 7 of the bill removes requirements under the Friendly Societies and Credit Unions Act 1982. I was in this Parliament when we debated that bill and felt that the friendly societies and credit unions needed an Act of Parliament applying to credit unions. And now we are addressing those silly parts of that silly piece of legislation enacted so many years ago, which is an impediment to small business, because this National Party and the ACT Coalition with its friends believe in getting off the backs and out of the pockets of small business. The committee recommended the removal of Clause 113 of the bill. This clause amended Section 20 of the Takeovers Act 1993 to add international comity as an objective to the Takeovers Code. Now to the Regulatory Reform Repeals Bill.
The final change recommended by the Commerce Committee that I will comment on is the inclusion of a new Schedule 2 to the Regulatory Reforms Bill. The schedule contains 3 additional regulations to be automatically revoked as the acts that are made under would be repealed by this bill. And that makes sense, and people will welcome that. This is a great night for small business up and down the country, Mr Speaker.
Sorry to interrupt the honourable member. The time has expired. The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Clayton Cosgrave.
Speaker,